Well, we start off with the classic index, average actually, not much of a difference between those two words here, and that is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And that is a terrible index. I mean, like any group of 30 stocks, doesn't really matter how you pick them, it's going to look like the total market more or less over time. But the variations are going to be large, the difference between the Dow and the total market. The implementation costs are going to be high, a very peculiar formula for constituting it. So that's just not a very good index. The S&P is the one I used just because it was really the only known index of the time, but also because we thought the big entree here was into the corporate pension market. And every single one of those retirement plans is looking at the S&P 500. So call that a competitive response. Mm-hmm. We could have used the total stock market as the index. It was, while the S&P goes back to 1928, I think the Wilshire, but now they've extended it way back to 28. But then in those days, probably went back to about 72. So it was not an option I really even thought about. Sure. But it is more complete, total stock market. And to the point where I could see the future pretty easily, you usually can in these cases. We used the S&P 500, and after about its 12th year, it became apparent that while it had a high correlation with the total stock market, probably 98% or something like that, still those large cap stocks in the S&P 500 accounted for about 85% of the market, and that left 15% in mid-cap and small cap, roughly 10 in mid-cap and 5 in small cap. So why not convert the fund into a total stock market index fund? It struck me that was a great theoretical idea and a terrible idea for our shareholders in the marketplace. So we started the Extended Market Index Fund, which picked up that last little bit. And then by 1993, since it was called a completion fund. If you wanted the total market, we could give it to you by having you own those two series. But by 1993, it just seemed silly to keep doing it that way, although we still do it that way today, but we had a total stock market index. Not to my surprise at all, total stock market index is now larger than the 500. You know, it's probably today about 325 billion compared to 305 billion, something like that.
And the total stock market, is it U.S. or is it?
U.S.
Okay.
Now, there is this modern thinking that the total world market should be the way you invest. I'm not so sure about that. I'm always a contrarian. I'm always from Missouri. My thought process is two lines of thought. One, we earn our money in dollars. We save our money in dollars. We spend our money in dollars. And we invest in our money in dollars. Why wouldn't you want to stick with dollars as your only medium of investment? You don't have to worry about currency and all that kind of thing. The second level is, if you look at the U.S. corporate world, 50% of its revenues and 50% of its profits, earnings, come from outside the U.S. So you already own an international fund. And then someone says, well, they fluctuate differently, to which I would say, so what? That's not a good reason for doing it at all, unless you can define standard deviation and you care about the difference between a 15% standard deviation and a 14% standard deviation. And I'll accept that it can matter under certain theoretical circumstances, but I defy the average investor even to tell me what standard deviation is. It's a term of art. We own the business, know it, and it's useful in its own way. And there's certainly a big difference between a standard deviation of, say, 11 or 10 or 11 or 12% in a balanced fund, which fluctuates less, and an all-equity fund, which may have a standard deviation of around 16 or 17%. Variation in returns from one period to the next. And so I don't see that as useful. And I don't see the so-called efficient market as useful. You draw this little high horizon. And the reason I don't, and I wrote a little bit about this, quite a bit about it in my book, Common Sense on Mutual Funds, and that is that every time you take the efficient market line, showing you how much in U.S. and how much in international, it's up here sometimes, it's down here sometimes, inverted sometimes. Which efficient market are you going to buy? Well, you say, of course you'd buy the most recent, and that's probably the worst choice because that's what's been happening. And if you believe in reversion to the mean, which I do profoundly, it's all going to change. So my position on international really is, by the way, almost nobody agrees with me on this. So your students are going to have to make their own judgment. But to me, you can do it fine with U.S. only. You're much more, but if you want to do international, the likelihood it will hurt you a lot is very small. But nonetheless, given the fact that dollars and the euro and the yen and so on, renminbi, are different currencies, I don't see any problem with all U.S. And I would guess that might even do a little better, although I don't know that. But if you want to if you feel the great urge to be with the modern trend, put up to 20% of your equities in international. Right now the U.S. is about 45% of the world, and international, this market capitalization, is about 55% of the world. I just think an American investor, a U.S. investor, doesn't need to have over half of his equity capital outside the U.S. And everybody says you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But I'm sorry to tell you that my attitude is usually, if one more person tells me I'm wrong, I'll know I'm right. Now, that's not necessarily constructive or wise, but I think that those that look at the story of this company would say it's been right more than it's been wrong.